Good afternoon. Welcome. Sorry about the late start. Thank you for joining us. This is a Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, May 3rd. Okay, first on our agenda this evening, we have a couple proclamations. The first one is for World Migratory Bird Day, and Council Member Atkins is going to present that one. Do we have Mary Weber here? Oh, come on forward. Thank you.
Okay, whereas migratory birds are some of the most beautiful and easily observed wildlife that share our communities, and whereas these migrant species also play an important economic role in our community, controlling insect pests and generating millions in recreational dollars statewide, and whereas Marion is taking measures to engage the community to educate the community the importance of birds and bird-related activities, whereas Marion being officially recognized as an Iowa bird-friendly community and has committed to protect, improve, and educate the protection of birds within the community. And whereas the World Migratory Bird Day officially is held each year on the second Saturday in May, which supports our moral responsibility to protect bird life. And whereas WMBD, World Migratory Bird Day, is not only a day to foster appreciation for wild birds, to celebrate and support migratory bird conservation, but also a call to action. Now, therefore, I, Colette Atkins, on behalf of Mayor Abu Osley, City of Marion, do hereby proclaim May 14th, 2022 as World Migratory Bird Day in the City of Marion, and I urge all residents to celebrate this observance to support efforts to protect and conserve migratory birds and their habitats in our community and the world at large. Would you like to say a few things today? Yes, please, you bet.
Thank you all for your time and also for officially recognizing the importance of birds and how they make our community a more vibrant and healthy place to live.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
It's okay.
You missed the photo op. Okay.
Darn it.
All right. The next one is going to be presented by Councilmember Sternad. And this one is for Building Safety Month, and Gary Hansen with the Building Department is going to accept that one.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is Building Safety Month, and the proclamation goes, whereas Marion is committed to recognizing that our growth and strength depends on the safety and essential role of our homes, buildings, and infrastructure play, both in everyday life and when disasters strike. And whereas our confidence in the resilience of these buildings that make up our community is achieved through the devotion of vigilant guardians building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, plumbers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure the safe construction of buildings. And whereas these guardians are dedicated members of the International Code Council, a nonprofit that brings total local, state, territorial, tribal, and federal officials who are experts in the built environment to create and implement the highest quality codes to protect us in the buildings where we live, learn, work, and play. And whereas these modern building codes include safeguards to protect the public from hazards such as hurricanes, snowstorms, tornadoes, wildland fires, floods, and earthquakes. And whereas Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role of our communities, largely unknown protectors of the public safety. Our local code officials who assure us of safe, sustainable, and affordable buildings that are essential to our prosperity. And whereas Safety for All Building Codes in Action, the theme for Building Safety Month 2022 encourages us all to raise awareness about the planning for safe and sustainable construction, career opportunities in building safety, understanding disaster mitigation, energy conservation, and creating a safe and abundant water supply to all who benefit. And whereas each year in observance of Building Safety Month, people all over the world are asked to consider the commitment to improve building safety, resilience, and economic investment at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential service provided to all of us by local and state building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies in protecting lives and property. Therefore, I, Randy Sternad, on behalf of Mayor Nicholas Abu Asli, the Marion Mayor, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2022 as Building Safety Month and encourage our residents to join us as we participate in Building Safety Month activities. Congratulations.
I'll try not to take too long. I could talk forever on this subject, but ICC promotes this every year in May, and they do a 4-week period. And week 1 this year is energy and innovation. So we're looking a lot at solar, wind power, and electric vehicles, and charging stations are starting to be a big thing. Week 2, we do building safety careers. People don't realize it, but in the building industry, as far as inspectors go, there is a big job. They're very, very plentiful for that. A few months ago, I spent an hour with the Kirkwood building trades students down there and discussed careers with them. Week 3 is disaster preparedness. And real quickly on disasters, we are really aware of this because of the ratio, but the analysis shows that over a 20-year period, cities, counties, and other that have adopted the modern building codes have avoided $132 billion in damages. That's compared to those communities that and jurisdictions who do not have building codes. Implementing building codes can save the community money. It reduces insurance premiums, lowers bond ratings, and can help them apply for federal grant funds. Week 4 is water safety, protecting against stormwater runoff, hazardous spills, and aging infrastructure can cause our water to become affected. I just want to thank the council and the mayor for your support with the building codes. So thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, we'll have 3 more proclamations on Thursday. It's a big month. All right, on to presentations this evening. The first one is a presentation from Prospect Meadows. Jack here, welcome. Hi, Jack.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me come today and give an update on Prospect Meadows, where we've been, or where we're going. We do have a video that Hopefully we'll play at the start here, and then I'll kind of fill in from that. But this is sort of a sneak peek at the video that's going to be shown tomorrow at the Medco luncheon out at Prospect Meadows. And by the way, if you're coming to watch Ryan in the home run derby after the event, I don't think I'd wear my best shoes. It's a little bit wet out there. Tents up, and they're working out this afternoon to get it in good shape, but should be a fun event. It's gonna be a little chilly, but they have sides and heaters, so should be a good event. Is that video ready to show? Can you do that quick? Maybe. That video was put together and narrated by our general manager, Steve James. He did a nice job on that. Looks good. And I think it gets to the heart of a lot of things. One of the things he did mention in there is the growth that we've had in the Miracle League. This year, they have 80 kids that have signed up to participate in the Miracle League. So now they'll have games on Saturday morning at 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, and 11:30. They've added the Yankees and the Red Sox to the roster this year with the two new teams that they've been able to bring in. So if you haven't been out there for that, it's definitely worth the time. Last weekend was the first weekend that the Miracle League started. And I had called Byron Tabor with the Kiwanis and asked him, "Are you going to play today?" He said, "It's not very nice." And he said, "If I don't, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble with a lot of kids." but it really goes to show you how much that means to the special needs population to be able to get out there and participate and have fun and play. And the League of Dreams has done very well too. That's been expanded from second and third graders to second through fifth graders for kids that come out there and play, and they really don't have any expenses whatsoever. They get the gloves, bats, ball, uniforms, the training, coaching is all complimentary. So those are two programs that, you know, we're very proud to have out there. I will say that we have started, we started in mid-March. It hadn't been very nice, as you know, but we've had over 5,000 people so far. We've been averaging about 1,000 a weekend. And what it is, it's called the Perfect Game, which of course is our largest tenant. It's called the Perfect Game Spring League. And they play every Saturday and Sunday, to the chagrin of some of the parents this past month with the weather. But yeah, we've had a good turnout each weekend for those. We did have to cancel once, but that's the beauty that we have really with the turf. This morning, I think we had 2 games on the schedule, and by later this afternoon, we had 7 games on the schedule because they were canceled, obviously, wherever they were playing because of the rain. So for us, you know, with the turf, it makes it a lot easier to get people out there. But anyway, starting this weekend, we'll have an estimated 850 teams that will be coming to Prospect Meadows through September, which will generate us probably around 34 to 35,000 visitors to the area. The vast majority of those will be from out of town, and the vast majority of those will be staying 2 to 4 nights. So it's not like they're day travelers. Of those 34,000 people, most of those people are here anywhere from, like I said, 2 to 4 days. Right now, this weekend, when we start, we have 7 states that will be out there. We have 60 teams that will be coming in for our first tournament. And these are kind of, they come in Friday night. We have games at 7:30 and 9:30 on Friday night. Then we have all day Saturday, all day Sunday. We start at 8 in the morning and went to 10 at night. So that's how many games these teams will play in a shortened period. Those people are only here 2 nights. But once school gets out, then the tournaments start on Thursday morning and run through Sunday. So if you're playing on Thursday early, then people will get here on Wednesday. So they would be here Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. If they don't play till later in the day on Thursday, they may come in and just stay Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. So anyway, it really is kind of a neat program. I had someone at the restaurant down at Jersey Mike's. Well, all of the local businesses, we kind of give them a map so they know what's going to happen. Like this weekend, they know 60 teams are coming in. We had a gentleman last year say that between games, they had a break. He said, I've never waited in line for 35 minutes for a Jersey Mike sandwich before, but I said, well, he said, it wasn't the service was bad. He said, service was good, but at any given time, we've got 16 teams that are leaving and 16 teams that are coming in. Well, that's over 600 people that are leaving. And if 2 or 3 of the teams decide to go to the same place, I mean, it's just, you're going to have a lot of traffic. So, but it's a good thing. And obviously we try and keep everybody up to speed in regards to where we're at. One of the things that I did want to touch on was just that with all the good news that we've had in terms of, you know, the people that are coming, what we've done to date, it still has had its challenges. Obviously, the first year we got started late due to construction woes. 2020, as Steve said, was 2020. We didn't get started again till June. Last year was our first full year. We were affected somewhat still by the COVID, but I don't notice anything this year. I haven't heard a lot of teams, you know, that have canceled right now. I mean, we keep our fingers crossed, but we have talked a little bit with Ryan and Mayor Nick about what our future needs, what our vision is and relationship moving forward with Marion, but obviously, don't want to take up a lot of time here tonight. Just really wanted to give you an update and kind of open it up, I guess, for questions that you might have that I hopefully could answer.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Questions from council? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jack, first off, I want to, I think it was late October, I came out and visited with you and you gave me a tour of the meadows.
Yep.
And so I guess compared to the total number of teams you had this last season,
Mhm.
how does this season project to compare? More?
More, yeah, we're gonna have more teams this year, probably somewhere in the range of 100. The only wild card we have right now is that that fall schedule is pretty big, but they don't really start booking those until July or August. So until we get those numbers in, but it's definitely higher than perfect game tournaments are definitely higher than they've been, but that's to be expected. I mean, the more years they have it, you know, the other thing, and it's really a compliment to Marion, Lynn County, Cedar Rapids, I guess everybody, Robbins, Hiawatha, people love it here. And it's not just Prospect Meadows. They like the Iowa people. They like the Iowa friendly. I mean, I drive the carts all the time out there. So those people don't know who I am, that I'm involved. They probably think I'm some old retired guy that's helping out on the golf carts. So they're not afraid to say whatever they're going to say. And but overall, our survey last year, we had 84% said that they would recommend and are planning on coming back to Prospect Meadows. Ranked it highly, I guess is probably a better word. So you know, they just like the ease of getting there. They like the people, the customer service. They love the hotels that they stay in. They like the places they go to eat. It's just people. We had a couple from Arkansas, grandparents that were here for 5 days last year, and they told me that they'd never been to any place so beautiful. You know, I think we live here and kind of take it for granted when you're in it every day, but they said, my gosh, now they were here in July when it was as green as it could be and the corn was up and just a beautiful setting. They kidded that their daughter had a chance to come here or go to Pensacola Beach. And she said, we called her granddaughter, and she said, we called her today and told her she made the wrong decision. She should have came to Prospect Meadows and not Pensacola Beach. I said, well, she may not agree with that, but.
Well, and I talked about this in my State of the City speech that, you know, we can't undervalue what you just said about people. It's beyond the economic impact, the opportunity we have as a region to show people from outside the region what we're all about and to highlight the positives of this area, which is really good for workforce development and, you know, continued growth and all that. So go ahead, Colette.
Comment and then a question. So yes, those teams that come in, right, they're spending lots of time and money here. As a previous parent that used to travel around with baseball, the amount of money I would spend at Jersey Mike's and Quick Start and all of those places was too much. But I know that you talked a little bit about the survey that you did. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically what you heard from the resident or the folks that came, the things that they really liked about it and areas where they said, you know what can we do differently? So can you just give us a little more about that, Jack?
The only real negative that we had was the restroom situation. You know, we have 4 that were put in down by the main entrance, but up on the 2 quads where people are 99% of the time, they're porta johnies up there. And that was under the comments section. I would say that dominated the negative comments. Or there was a couple in there about fields are too far from the parking lot, you know, just some things. But the only thing that really stood out from a negative standpoint was the restrooms. And other than that, it was a combination of, I think, good things in regards to the customer service mainly. This is one thing that I really look for on those surveys is, you know, what do they think when they get here? The friendliness of the people. Everything was really pretty positive. Colette, it was just the negative part of it was just the restrooms. And, you know, we tell people that we're working on that and actually getting the 4. This past weekend, there's heat in those restrooms. So that's where most of the people were hanging out because it's warm in there. But that does help. But obviously, it's not the long-term solution, certainly.
Other questions?
All right. Well, thanks. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Brooke Prouty, for a presentation regarding Main Street Iowa Award. Brooke is the director of Uptown Marion.
Thank you. So of course now my computer decides not to work. Thanks for bringing that up. This is the award that we received at the Main Street Iowa Awards last Friday. Oh, Friday before that. We had a great group of 10 people that represented Marion and received this award from the governor and Debbie Durham. So that was really exciting to see and to celebrate with all the other main streets across the state. This award in particular, I wanted to read the application that we submitted. It starts, while many main streets experience the hardship of a large streetscape project and construction closures, this project shows how a district can successfully support and retain businesses. It also shows how a community can utilize a streetscape as an opportunity to build support for small business, along with improving the infrastructure for future generations and for businesses. The 3 takeaways from this project. This project successfully retained and supported the businesses of Uptown Marion through the first 8 months of the streetscape project. Number 2, this project assisted in setting up the historic buildings with the infrastructure to support future businesses and uses safety features in doing that. And number 3, this project boosts the morale between businesses and rallied the support of the Marion community to support these small businesses through the construction. So Main Street is kind of taking us as an example, and I've already been called by another Main Street to come talk to them about how we've done our streetscape project so far and how we've supported the businesses through it. So I want to thank you guys for your support and for contributing to this award. Any questions? Oh, yeah, we have to have a picture.
While I'm down there.
You can hold this. Or do you want to hold the nice one? You can hold the nice one. And Amber has to get in this one too.
Amber, I can take a picture.
Does Mike get any too?
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brooke, and thanks to everyone for their great collaboration and cooperation with the project. Did you have a comment?
I do.
Go ahead.
So Brooke and Mike, and is Jill here?
See Jill.
You probably just hear this. I think I got up to speed pretty quickly on what the scope of the Main Street project, the streetscape was going to be. And the little, spidey hairs on the back of my neck kind of went up, started tingling, because I thought, oh my gosh, what impact is this going to have to our uptown businesses? Well, Brooke, you and the team pretty quickly allied all of my fears about how you were managing this. And so I just want to say congratulations, because you told me what you were going to do and you were doing it. So thank you.
Yeah, I second that. And to our entire team's credit, and I'm talking about their city team, chamber, everyone. When we look at the Artway, a lot of people don't know that was a project in preparation for this project. So the planning for this has been going on for a long time, and it was really visionary, I think, on our team's part to undergo the Artway project to create those back entrances to the businesses while we at the time that we closed the street. And that the Artway, I think, was 2016, 2015, 16, something like that, around that time. And so that's how far back the planning for this streetscape project has gone. So congratulations to everyone. And it really has made a lot of difference. The comments from the businesses, it's just been a positive process. Projects like this don't happen without some inconvenience, but overall, when you think about the negative impacts that we could have experienced, this has been a very positive experience, I think, for everyone, and we're all much better for it. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just a quick comment about how successful our communication plan was. There were times I would talk to business owners and find out new information that I didn't know. So I was going to them to find out what was going on, and they knew. And that's the outcome of a successful communication plan. So congrats on doing that the right way.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks again. Okay, next on our agenda is a presentation from Bush Construction regarding Marion Library Building Project. Welcome. Please state your name for the meetings.
Nick
recording.
Hecker. I was up here earlier, a couple weeks ago, more about a month ago, about some of the cost escalations and such with the project. We need to do some clarifications, so that's why I'm here. Last time I was up here, it was brought up about the BIM. I was a little unprepared for that with some dates. And was given some incorrect information at that time. And I just wanted to clarify those dates and see if you had any other questions. So when we talked originally, the subcontractors or the contractors were made aware of their low bid on December 18th. With a kickoff meeting following for the BIM on January 6th of 21. That followed with underground being approved on February 4th. The first floor was approved on, April 16th, and the entire project BIM was complete on May 10th of last year. So there was a little bit of variance in the dates I gave you originally with the final approval. So I just wanted to clarify that because I know BIM was brought up in the last time this was discussed and became somewhat of an issue, and just wanted to clear that up. I know with those dates, our BIM manager that took care of this project went through by industry standards. This was maybe like a week past industry standard of an average project for approval. So that was where that fell.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add before we ask for questions?
Nope, that's pretty much all I had for this one.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Oh, go ahead, Grant.
So one of the things I'm just curious about, and you thank you for putting together sort of a milestone schedule from basically your kickoff meeting down through May 10th relative to the final sign off for the second floor overhead. The question I have is what drove you to go in kind of a waterfall, first having the BIM completed and then sign off on underground, and then first floor overhead, and then second floor overhead? Why was it broken up like that versus, I guess what I'm trying to understand is was that absolutely necessary, or were there other things that were influencing that structure of execution for the BIM?
It's just a gradual procedure, just like construction would be. We had the underground completed first so we could get the underground rough-ins started. To not really expedite the project, but to keep it moving forward. And then moved into the first floor, into the second floor, just as the natural progression of building the building.
So one, I think, overarching question is, in between your kickoff in December of 2020 down through the final sign off and May 10th, 2021. And really asking kind of from a total project perspective. Wasn't there general awareness that supply chain constraints, labor constraints were starting to loom upon us just because of pandemic and other things? I guess I guess what I'm just trying to understand is general awareness of adverse influences on the overall project. And that question probably stands for the other representatives here today. I guess could we have effectively planned our way out of the constraints that are of issue now?
Well, I mean, it's basically my personal opinion of it, being in construction for 30 years, is that nobody knew what was coming. And I think that was, we were just starting to get into the beginning of it. And, if you watch the news, one channel said that the end of the world was coming, and the next channel said that, everything was going to be okay in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So I don't think anybody had a crystal ball, if you will, to project what was going to happen and the escalations that were going to take place, and some of it that's still going on.
One last question, Your Honor. Was the role of Bush to help coordinate across all vendors, and I guess coordinate also contract compliance across all vendors?
Vendors, no, not really. I mean, we would have been more responsible to make sure they were using the correct materials, but not the vendors themselves. Those have been basically a sub of a sub.
Yeah, I meant to say the subcontractors to the project, not.
So yes, I mean, it was our job to coordinate the construction of the job, I guess, if you will.
Okay.
And some of the planning, which has become an extraordinary job that I'm not sure how to do right now with the way the current situations are.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from Acme, Ahern, and Pipe Pro. Also regarding the building project.
My name is Don Berriger, owner of Acme Electric Company. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and try to answer any questions I can about the BIM process and our request for price escalations. I think, as Nick mentioned, we don't have a particular issue with the timeline for the BIM. I think it was probably within industry standards. But in the question of could we have anticipated these types of escalations, a couple examples that I picked out, the rough order of magnitude in our documentation that we provided, the pricing that you see as actual was the price that we purchased it at the time that we purchased it, and we purchased it as soon as the BIM was coordinated for that particular phase. In other words, like the underground, the PVC would have been purchased first. Those prices reflect what we purchased and what they cost at the time. But as an example, 600 MCM, which is the big copper cable that feeds the switchgear. As an example, at the time of bid, it was $6 a foot. At the time that we bought it out, when coordination was done and we felt we weren't at risk and at purchasing, it was $16 a foot. That's over 2.5 times, and there's close to 2,000 feet of it on the project. The number 12, which is the 20 amp circuits that feed all the lights, and it was at bid time, it was at 75 cents a foot. At the time we purchased, that was $2.21 a foot, times 96,000 feet. That's a multiplier of 3x. So overall, what we've presented to you, the overall escalation for our bill of material was 85% over bid, and which reflects in about $50,000. That's what we've presented to you. We've presented an argument for force majeure because my interpretation of the conversations with the city engineer and the city attorney and amongst the contractors and from perception of what I thought I was hearing from you folks was that better illustrated and qualified the escalation and tied it back to our contract under section 8.3 of the AIA document. That's what we were asked to do, was to tell a story, lay out timelines, and then tie it back to our contract. So I feel that the force majeure avenue does a better job of that. Not to say that the change order, we wouldn't accept the change order. I think they kind of go hand in hand. I guess I'd ask if there's any questions or anything I can elaborate on.
Questions?
Well, I think, so the question that I asked Nick is still there. I guess the question is across all of the trades and with Bush, wasn't there any kind of premonition that we were getting into a supply chain environment and the costing environment that was going to work negatively on the project? And on that standpoint, that's an emergent risk. And I'm trying to understand what the risk mitigation profile was in order to, deal with it from a project management perspective, because all of the trades were in the same boat relative to materials and probably labor.
Labor was absolutely the risk, but the order of magnitude of these escalations, no one could have seen that. We did the best we could in buying it out when it was coordinated, when it was modeled, and that's where the pricing came back at. That's all I can tell you. It's unprecedented, the amount of escalation for these commodities that we experienced.
Okay, I have general understanding of the force majeure language that was in the contract documentation. And I think it was tied to a notification requirement. And that's where I just am trying to wonder from a project management perspective, if we had that sense that we were going to be getting into either material pricing availability or material price escalations and or availability constraints because of the supply chain, why that didn't across the entire project really trigger making the notifications that the contracts required. And it's really, my whole perspective is wrapped around, again, the risk mitigation applied across the total scope of the project.
As I said, we bought out the products when the BIM was completed, and there may have been a trade-off in buying it out at risk and having waste or whatever versus the price escalation. We just did not realize what the price escalation was going to be.
Okay.
I will say that from a change order standpoint, that change order was vetted by your construction manager as well as your architect. And we feel that it was justified, and brought it to you for submission. And I think that carries a lot of weight in not only force majeure, but also just on the stands of the change order. And I don't know of any, I guess I can't say because I don't know. I was gonna say, I don't know of any other change order requests that have gone through that vetting process and brought to you that have not been approved. So I think that's what you've spent city dollars on is those professionals and their experience and their expertise. And they brought that change order to you for submission for approval.
What's the general time frame that that change order was created and submitted?
I don't know that. Relatively late in the project. You know, that I wish we would have brought this to your attention sooner. I just don't, frankly, I just don't think that we had an idea of the magnitude.
Your Honor, just for clarification, the 3 change orders that were submitted at one time for price escalation were not actually fully executed. So there were not signatures, at least to my knowledge, from the architect, from Bush, or from the contractors on any of them. They were draft, just to clarify.
What was the date that we received them?
I would have to pull up the email and find them. I just have a copy of the actual change orders that were submitted to me.
Thanks. Yeah, I wasn't trying to speak out of turn. My impression was that they were vetted and that they're approved and they're brought to you. So. Anything else? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Parento with Pipe Pro. And I just, basically, everything that Don had to say is pretty much the same thing we have. We have PVC in common, we have copper in common. And there was a big storm in Texas in February of 21 that caused shortage of PVC, shut down a couple of plants, made materials harder to get and more expensive. Copper was just like examples, our piping. For one example would be 1-inch copper. We had 3,300 feet for $7,300 original. Then when we got it, $15,400 for the same exact order. It's just the prices went up and up and up, and we couldn't predict that. We bid this on November. Things starting to go awry, I guess, but bid date not as bad, and nobody can predict what was going to happen. So I guess I really don't know how we could foresee all this. But we did order every package we could, all the equipment and everything, as soon as that's clear, because that's consistent. So that there's no escalation in that. It's just the materials and stuff we could not order until BIM was finished. I really don't have anything else, but just the numbers. Any questions you have for me?
Questions?
Advantages to going second.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else? Okay, all right, thank you. Moving on with the consent agenda. There is nothing marked on the remainder of that page, page 2. Any items that need to be discussed? Any questions? Request for more details on anything? Okay, we'll move on to the next page, page 3, which is C1 is marked for discussion. Resolution approving the purchase from Kraus Plumbing and Heating of 2 new heaters.
Your Honor, I'll take that one. Acting Chief Hansen had to go. He's checking. There was an alarm that was tripped. So this is on our battalion chief, as part of our training program, was going to be presenting to the council. So that was why it was marked. We do have to replace 2 apparatus bay heaters at Station 2. Those heaters are 32 years old. So we've gone through, we went and submitted proposals for 3 local companies. The lowest bid was from Kraus Plumbing and Heating, amount of just under $9,500. But again, this was going to be more of a opportunity for our battalion chief to make a presentation, but unfortunately got called out. So.
Okay. Any questions? All right, none of the items on the remainder of the page are marked for discussion. Any questions on those? And also page 4 and 5. So feel free to call out anything that you have questions on or need further information on before Thursday. Yes, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I just, this was on E1, starting with E1, and it was just a, it triggered me to look at the rest of our items that relate to the library project, the various change orders, as well as progress payments. And Mike, you gave kind of a high level, at least because I asked you just a little bit about that, where we were at relative total project. I think that'd be useful to share with the balance of council, just, you know, high level accounting, because we're getting down to the end of that. But I, again, in our agenda here this week, we had 21 progress payments and or change orders that we're acting on. And so that's why I was triggered to, you know, say, gee, I wonder where we're at from a macroscopic perspective on the project. So if that could be shared with council, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, so just so council's aware, engineering has a master spreadsheet of all the contractors, the original contract amount, all the change orders to date, and all the payments to date. It does not have Bush, the architect, Anderson Bogert, some of those others, but it has all the actual contractors that are doing the work over there. So I can share that Excel spreadsheet with the balance of the council.
Okay. Any other questions through page 5? Okay, and then also on page 6, E24 is not marked. Any questions on that? Okay, E25.
Yes, Your Honor. So for E25, the Iowa Department of Transportation is asking for a letter of support similar to what we have recently been asking for both our Alburnett Road project and Tower Terrace from I-380 to 13. So in this case, they're looking to do a letter to Pete Buttigieg for the I-380 Wright Brothers Boulevard interchange. Obviously, this is not within the city of Marion, but it does impact our residents and commerce by getting this approved. So staff would recommend that the city council provide a letter of support. And so Amber can take the template that we've gotten from them that's in your packet and put it on our letterhead and change a few things so that it's more Marion specific, and then have the mayor execute that if that is something that city council is in favor of. But there was a fact sheet and then there's a template letter that was included as part of the packet.
Okay. Everyone okay with that?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. All right, so the remainder of page 6 is not marked for discussion. Any questions? Actually through F1 on page 7. All right, A1 under the regular agenda. Is that ML?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, every year the city sets aside funding for low-income housing assistance grant that is made available for nonprofits serving in our community. The Civil Rights Commission reviews requests and recommends awards to the City Council. This year, we had 20,000 in budget, and Civil Rights Commission is recommending awarding Marion Cares the full funding amount to support their eviction prevention program. Chris Thomas, president of Marion Cares, will be here with us on Thursday to accept the award on behalf of Marion Cares.
Okay, any questions on that? I know Brett Nillis with the Civil Rights Commission is here. If we have any questions for him, but any questions or comments? Okay, well, I think that's a great use of the of the funds. Okay. So that'll be on the agenda for Thursday for a vote. Any questions on A3 or A4? Okay, moving on to A5.
Thank you, Your Honor. This amendment to the ordinance is going to go hand in hand with the new rental housing inspection policy that was approved. I believe that was the last council cycle. So this is going to update our code to make that nuisance enforcement a little bit easier, not just for the rental properties, but for privately owned residential properties as well. Our chapter 50 needed some updates. We still had some provisions in there that are a little bit obsolete, like community cup and roller towels, things like that, that we just don't see anymore, especially since COVID. I hope nobody's got a community cup on premises. But then we took out some other things that are more properly taken care of by the criminal codes by the state of Iowa and would have a bigger penalty. We are also modifying, these are things that happened since I sent out my memo. One of the provisions, the prohibitions is for wires that are strung less than 15 feet above surface of the ground. Chapters 160 and 162 make some allowances for that. So we are adding in that qualification so that those are not a nuisance since we allow them at other places in our code. That's to get rid of that conflict. And then we are also adding a nuisance for discharge of downspouts less than 3 feet to the adjoining property lines, or discharge of sumps less than 10 feet to the adjoining property lines. And then the last addition will be for a nuisance property. And then I'm also adding a definition of a nuisance property. One of the situations that we run into are repeat offenders. We see the same people over and over and over, and the same thing tends to happen with the rental properties. Our PD goes out to the same homes over and over again. And we do have our crime-free housing program. Right now, the plan is to enforce that under our disorderly house definition. But I think if that were challenged, it would be a little bit harder to enforce under disorderly house. So we're adding the nuisance property. Cedar Rapids just did this too. Their definition is pages and pages long and lists out every possible offense. We just kept it kind of more succinct, and it matches what our crime-free housing does. And it also added some provisions in there for the repeat municipal infractions that we see. And that's to kind of help tighten that enforcement up a little bit. And what crime-free housing was something we brought at the same time we did the rental housing inspection back in 2018. And what that does is when we have a rental house where we have repeat calls, we send the landlord a letter, and then they can use that as a means of evicting troublesome clients, or in other situations where maybe they're in compliance otherwise, but we have a situation where they're disruptive to the other tenants and it's a problem. And so, and I forgot, one final addition to the nuisance code that was a recent addition is we are also adding a provision that it is a municipal infraction to either shoot off or allow to be shot off fireworks outside of the parameters that you're allowed to do so. We've struggled with a way to enforce that. Last year, we had the idea that we would also try and enforce that under disorderly house, but we were in meeting with our prosecutor. He was concerned about meeting the burden on a criminal level, but the civil level is a lesser burden. So this way we would be able, even if we couldn't prove who the person was shooting the fireworks off, if you're hosting a party and you're shooting off fireworks, we know you're shooting them off. We don't have to prove who it was. You're hosting that party, you're breaking the law, we're going to do an infraction. We're going to try that.
Okay. Questions? Go ahead, Paula.
It's a related question. So my question is can you just remind us, I'm not sure who it would be, but what the process is, right? So if we have a resident that has a complaint, what is the process? I think folks sometimes don't understand what that process is. And so it might be a nice refresher for folks that are listening today.
So I can answer that because I work with our code compliance division on a regular basis. When the complaint comes in, it goes to the code compliance division first, and they'll go out and inspect and see what the issue is. And this is for a property violation, not for a criminal complaint. Obviously, we'll let the police handle that. We won't make our inspectors go do that. And then after that, usually we'll try and resolve that without taking any formal action first. If we get a call, we'll say, hey, mow your lawn, trim the weeds, whatever the situation is. If it is a mowing situation, then typically parks will go out and abate that, similar to how we do the snow removal. If it's something like weeds, tree trimming, property maintenance, things like that, then if they don't comply, we send out an order to abate. That gives them a reasonable amount of time to correct the deficiencies. And if they don't within that time frame, then our next option is to either abate the issue and then we assess the cost to their property taxes, or we file a municipal infraction and then we go to court and they can incur a civil penalty of $750 for the first offense, and it's $1,000 for a subsequent.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So at 3 a.m. on July 5th, a large barrage of fireworks are going off in a neighborhood. What's the complaint pathway and response pathway on that under this ordinance?
So under this ordinance, it would still be the same. The PD would handle that as they have in the past years, but if they have evidence that they know where it's from, and I have not talked to our crime-free counterparts yet, or I haven't talked to the chief fully about this, but what our plan was with disorderly house was then instead of trying to figure out who was the person lighting the fuse, we would look for who owns the property, who's the host. And so there would still be the situation where you just can't tell where it's coming from, but frequently people do these in association with a party or a gathering or something like that. So if we know that, it would be similar to a noise complaint. And then if the police had enough evidence to say, yes, this is where it came from, all the garbage is in their yard, then they would turn that information over to Matt and I, and we would pursue a municipal infraction.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. That brings us to engineering. Public hearing regarding the 2022 sanitary cured in place pipe rehabilitation project. How's that?
Good. So on Thursday, we'll actually have the public hearing for this project. We did receive 4 bids. The low bid came in from SAC Construction at $244,849, which was 93.67% of the engineer's estimate. This has just a completion date of 10/28/22 and $300 per day in liquidated damages if they don't complete it within that time frame. So we are recommending approving contract with SAC Construction.
Okay, questions for Mike on that one? Okay, then that takes care of E2, and then E3 and E4 are not marked. Any questions on those? Okay, E5.
So E5, so we had a discussion on this at the last city council meeting. I know Mr. Sternad was not able to be there, but this is actually establishing our truck routes from the 94, I believe, resolution and updating it to current standards today. So it's basically all US and state highways. Business 151, except that section from 7th Street to 27th Street. And then it's 6th Avenue from 7th Avenue to, it should be 7th Street to 27th Street. We'll make sure that's right for Thursday. So basically we're in the business 151, we're having them drive on the official business 151, except for that area in the uptown where we want them on 6th Avenue on the new section. So those are our official truck routes. Again, that doesn't mean that they can't be elsewhere in town if they have a designated place that they're making a delivery. But if they are not making a designated delivery, they should be on those truck routes.
Okay. Questions? Next, E6.
So I'll talk about E6, E7, and E8 all at the same time. So these are the actual resolutions approving the request for escalation for the three contractors and the dollar amounts that are in there. In the staff report, I took some of the documentation out that was provided at the previous time that they did the presentation, so you didn't see all the invoices. I knocked it down. If you want to go back and see that, I can provide that again. But each one is the amount that those contractors are asking for. And again, staff's recommendation is not to approve.
Okay, any further questions or discussion on that? Okay. Community development, F1. Is that Tom?
So on Thursday, there'll be a public hearing regarding a request to rezone property along Albernet Road from undesignated to SR2 suburban medium density single family residential. The property is highlighted and hatched on the screen here. You can see that the property that's developed around it is of similar nature and density. The applicants are going from an undesignated to an SR2 zoning district classification because the property was recently annexed. If you recall, this was a recent annex property. The developer is proposing to go to similar product is to the north. The property to the south that's highlighted in red on the overhead is still in the county, Dawn Drive area. So they're right on the edge of the community. The project is pretty standard single family residential development and is similar in characteristics to the surrounding property. The Planning Commission reviewed the proposal and recommended approval. And on Thursday, we will have the opportunity to hear from the public regarding the proposed rezoning.
Okay, questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, for that property that is notched out and not within the red perimeter, what was there any concern from that property owner about this development? I'm trying to remember. I thought there was something of some concern relative to that.
So the entire area, except I believe one property was annexed. And I believe the one property owner in the southeast corner, and I'm going off a little bit of memory here. It was not a consenting property owner to the annexation. So those two parcels are larger, and therefore they would not be in the SR2 zoning district classification. I don't believe that we're included in the mapping of this, but I'll verify. But those two are pre-existing homes that were developed in the county. Okay. The remaining property, the owner, he actually owns the piece between the southeast corner piece and the area highlighted in red, sold that to an individual, and then is developing the remaining portion of property that he brought in.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that highlights what was foggy in my memory. So
there was if you recall, we had a questionable moment because there was a transfer of property, and we wanted to ensure that the annexation petition that was moving to the state was correct and intact. Because of that transfer, we're not made aware of transfers, but in between we were. So we were able to get that squared away, and that has been approved and recorded with the state.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, next item.
So on Thursday, we'll have another public hearing, and this is regarding an ordinance amendment to our zoning code, which allows for and provides, it's two ordinances. One is just providing for the use of the sidewalk as sidewalk cafes in the U1, U2, and UTC1 zoning district classification. And then another ordinance is laying out the parameters upon which that ordinance will exist. And I'll point out that we've been talking about a larger document. It's a policy document. It's going to talk about more of the granular details of how and what that area needs to look like as it relates to a project. It outlines the process and really kind of walks through the design aesthetic of it. What we've done, and Ms. Bolerman can support me in this, is we outline the parameters within the zoning that allows for the use and sets the standards. We will adopt a policy document by resolution that will guide how those areas look and feel. So what we need to do is get through the ordinance adoption to make the use of the sidewalk allowable, set the general parameters, and then once the ordinance is approved, we will adopt the standards upon which they will be required to adhere to. So on Thursday, the public hearing is really about locating the sidewalk cafes out there and the general standards, like how big it's got to be, what needs to be in place, what are the liquor license requirements for those areas. It's not getting into the details of what the tables look like or the chairs look like or the fencing material or signage or the general design characteristic or the specific design characteristic as it relates to what will go in those areas. So does that make sense? There'll be a much larger document that we'll hold further discussion on upon adoption of the actual ordinance. The ordinance will reference the policy document by resolution. No different than the city may charge a fee for a subdivision. The fees will be laid out and set by resolution. So that's what we're doing.
Your Honor, just to add to that, that makes it a lot easier should we need to change what those design standards are in the future. This way, if we need to change those in the future, we can change it by resolution. That's one reading. If we want to change it in the future by ordinance, we would have to do 3 readings, and I believe we'd have to do a public hearing because it's the zoning code. So we would have a long drawn out situation if we wanted to do even something so simple as just change what we allow as a material for the barriers. And so it's really common to do it this way. This is what the other cities we've looked at have done, is the ordinance just lays out the basics and makes it permissible, and then we get to decide the details later.
Go ahead, Steve, and then Grant.
Yeah, so this is going to take 3 readings to get through this, right? And so when are we going to be talking about the materials? Because
Well,
is that after the 3 readings?
that's generally how we do it, is once the ordinance is placed, we can develop this. We
Okay,
can
so-
bring forward the policy. I mean, we can do it before, we just don't adopt it if that's a desire of the council. The planning commission has reviewed it.
Well, I do have comments about the materials, at least one particular comment. So my question is going to be, by the time we do 3 readings, we're going to be in the middle of June.
Mhm.
And I'm sure if anybody wants to do an outdoor cafe, they need to know quicker than that, I would assume, or at least some of them, on what those material standards are going to be. Now, you've got a draft of that out there,
Mhm.
but if it's not final, somebody can do something that may not be allowable. So that's kind of my question is, how much further do we push that down the road before we discuss it or try to finalize that? Can we do it at a parallel path?
We can, yes. Yeah, I can put it on the next agenda. It's ready to go.
Yeah.
Just generally, we won't bring forward the design standards for something that hasn't been authorized.
Well,
But
if we were talking about this
understanding
in
that we're doing
January, or
it anyway.
February, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But we're going to be talking about this
Mhm. Yeah.
probably the middle of June, and everybody's probably ready to go.
Yeah, I mean,
Has gone already.
Yeah, we've been processing in accordance with that document.
Right.
And I mean, it would make sense to wait if this was a very controversial topic or something, but I mean, I think
No,
we all kind of generally understand that we all want the sidewalk cafes, and so I think that's probably a good idea to do.
For the record, though, it's not holding anything up. Like, we're not holding back anything. We're still processing all of these. If someone brings one in tomorrow, we're using the standards and we're doing it by encroachment agreement, no different than we were before.
Okay.
So just so you're aware.
So it's not keeping anybody from.
But if we have a comment about the standards, we can't make that until June.
So that's, if we can bring it forward. But yeah, that's.
Okay.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so Steve's questions really answered, or the response to that answered what was in my mind is, we're trying to get this all implemented so that businesses can make use of it this summer.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't
I understand.
dissuade that I'm trying, we are processing them and you review them. Like you were saying, Mr. Jensen, we're bringing them forward as an encroachment agreement. You'll see everything. So we're not holding it to any other standard. You guys get to review them all.
So what we will do is at the next council meeting, we'll have the draft policy on, so you can see it as we start going through the ordinance. So we're going in the concurrent path that you're referencing.
Yeah, so past practice is being applied now to address the requests from businesses.
Yep.
And then and your decision criteria is predicated generally on what you're working on now.
Correct.
Okay. And so we're at the point, we're moving as fast as we can to be supportive of businesses for this summer. Okay, I'm done with that. One of the things that I think we're going to have happen is we're going to gain some experience, June, July, August, however late in the year, and is there a mechanism being contemplated where we can take some lessons learned, or to use Jason's favorite term, after action review, in order to then be an input to any changes to our ordinance or anything else that we want to make? I guess what I'm just suggesting is I think we're going to get either a round of compliments or a round of complaints or a mix of both that will have some beneficial influence on this. So.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of adopting them by resolution and not ordinance. We'd be able to tweak it rather quickly. My assumption is we're going to find. I mean, it's a pretty detailed document. There's already been a couple questions. I think Mr. Jensen asked a question and I was like, I don't know what we're doing with that. So, I mean, there's always those, especially when you're dealing with design, but yeah, the idea is that we would bring forward any application, be able to say, hey, these are, then make changes in the fall so we don't have issues, but it'd only be one consideration instead of, and then an amendment to the zoning code actually has to go back to the planning commission even ahead of the council. So it could take up to 3 months to make a minor adjustment to that ordinance. So that's why we've separated them.
And you have to expect there's going to be some adjustments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So by laying this out in a document on call it like the decorative side of it, or what does it look like, kind of thing. We're putting that expectation out there, what's allowed, so that a business can plan, right, to how they want that to look. And it's consistent instead of a one-off. Is that instead of because now we're kind of coming in saying, if they say, I want to put out tables and I want to use this, they pass this encroachment, we don't have anything that we're going off of what we anticipate we might be going forward with as far as fencing or tables. Because I think about if they're going to order some of this or get involved in it, because I agree with you, Grant, how do you do an adjustment if we find out something isn't really working without the risk of also having them invest significantly into the types of tables that we have said will be allowed, and then we potentially change that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, before they do any of that, they should come in with that agreement, because they're not allowed to do it, period, unless they do an agreement. So let's say if Tom's Chocolate Shop wanted to come in and put Tom's outdoor seating, I would say that's fine, but you got to put an encroachment agreement together. They would put the documentation together. We would take in and look at it and say, these are the concerns we have based on what we've been doing research for. So when it come to council, if they were doing something that was contrary, we would say, these are our concerns. This is what we've been working on before they would get any allowances. So then they would get approved by the council. So anything that happens out there is going to happen by you guys, and we will evaluate it against the criteria that are sitting out there.
Sarah might be concerned about, correct me if I'm wrong, that getting approved and they invest in the whatever, the fencing or whatever, and then the final
authorization.
The final regulations don't allow that or something.
We decide that isn't really working with us and we're going to need to change, that's not going to be allowed, or and then they're sitting with that. So the sooner, I guess, get going on that to ensure their investments are protected, because I think you're right. We all want to see this happen because we all know what this does for a community. and what everybody's looking for when they visit, when those thousands of people come here from Prospect Meadows and are looking for a place to dine out. So thanks for putting that together.
Any other questions on that? All right, thanks for your patience with us as we.
No, you're all right.
All right. So that takes care of the next two items, Tom?
That's correct.
And then F6 is not, well, I guess F6 is to remove from the table F7, so F7.
So Dave Hockett met with Les Arnold up at the restaurant on yesterday. He walked through a number of constraints that he has. He's not proposing a different layout. He has submitted some correspondence to Dave, and then also an illustration that further kind of outlines his constraints. I will forward that to the council tomorrow. It wasn't included in the packet because they just met yesterday. You'll have that before Thursday and be able to see what the conversation. He does plan to be here on Thursday. I did indicate that he would. It would be at the beginning of the meeting that would normally be the time for him to speak. So to be here at that time to address the council with his items. I will point out that the information that I received and that I'll forward out to the council for evaluation does get into a lot more detail than was there before. So.
Yeah, Tom, in the agenda memo, the narrative, the summary, I think references that there would be 2 steps into the alley, but the diagrams that's provided only shows 1. So if for Thursday, if that can just be clarified, yeah, I would appreciate it.
Gotta be at least 2 or 3, that's 3 feet high.
Well, it says place 2 steps into the alley. Is that the individual risers or 2 points of access?
The updated drawing does illustrate 2.
Okay, when you're saying steps, you're referring to upon which you place your feet.
Correct.
Thank you.
The treads.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Treads.
I was taking it wrong, as I frequently do.
So does that, sorry, so does that mean part of it is inset into the?
Part of the walkway
No.
or the stairs?
The stairs. If the only 2 steps are going to be in the alley?
Correct.
So the rest of it is inset into the?
Yeah, it's 22 inches.
Okay.
So.
Can
So
you,
essentially, you're going to step up, and then there'll be the wall.
oh, I think that's what the comment, are all the steps, I think about like shaving off into the existing patio space, or all of the steps come out into the alley?
That was my question.
That's what you're, yeah.
No, so if you. One second.
You know what I mean? So that there's nothing coming out into, it's all part of that existing cement space that you'd cut into? I don't think so.
I'm not touching that remote. The last time it was a catastrophe. Is there another, there's not another slide, is there, Tara? There, so as you can see here, or if you go back to that one, where that red line is, that's where the steps will begin to go down.
So it
So
does,
they're gonna cut so you'll have steps beginning there. He's planning to put a window there a bit, like where you could get a drink.
Okay, so.
And then their steps would start
Okay.
there because it's about 4 feet. So you gotta just like, I think it's
That's what we were wondering. It is
12
inset
inch
into
run-
the.
tread or 11-inch
Patio.
tread.
Yeah.
which
So
isn't
it's-
ideal. That's, I mean, the more it's into the existing and not out
Correct.
into.
His
is a good
limitation on
thing.
going all the way in is the fact that there's that window that's desired to be there.
Can you also remind me why they can't go out to the side alley, the north-south side?
That, I mean, I think that'll be a good question for him. We've indicated that the best case scenario is that it doesn't impede into the alley on either edge. He's, limited by wanting to create more space for his patrons. And I think that's a good question for him. We've kind of walked through even an angle, like I think the mayor had indicated doing it on the front and like at the corner
someone had said on the corner, filling out the corner and going up. He's afraid that it's just going to eat up too much of the area. So. Right. One thing and I think it's a good question. I will follow up. When the project is constructed, there may need to be a construction easement into the alley to provide for some footing exposure as well. That'll be something we'll have to talk about. I don't know the full constraints of the project, but I did take a peek at it this afternoon when we were doing the pickup, and I think they're going to need a whole new wall on either side, which means they'll probably have to come out into the alley. And so that'll be another conversation we'll probably have to have. You follow the seams of the existing, do you allow it to be cut? So it seems so simple, but yet very difficult.
Okay, other questions? Go ahead, Randy.
Thank you. That bench that's there now, I'm just wondering, and for snow removal in the winter time, do we use any equipment that goes through there? Or is that all hand shoveled out of there? Can anybody elaborate on that?
Yeah, we use one of our 1585, so it's about 6 feet wide. And that bench is there the entire snow removal. So we go around it.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yep.
We are now on the last page. First item is an annual update regarding Marion's Urban Forestry Division. So, Mike, welcome.
I just want to thank the council, mayor, for your time tonight. I briefly wanted to go through the update, but also our divisional staffing and kind of arrangement, just because we have some new council members and a new city manager as well since the last time I've had the chance to speak in front of you. So we do have 3 full-time staff, including myself, and 100% of our forestry staff is an ISA certified arborist. This is somewhat unique across the state, if not the country. Typically, there's 1 arborist on staff certified, but Marion, as we do reach higher, has moved to certify all 3 of our full-time employees. So we also have all 3 employees, full-time, excuse me, full-time employees certified for commercial application. And then myself, I am tree risk assessment qualified as well through the ISA. Starting last season and continuing into this summer season, we have 2 to 3 seasonal staff that support our initiatives in general, primarily tree watering and early tree care with some of the increased numbers that we've been maintaining. Next slide. Our headquarters and fleet operates primarily out of the Lau Maintenance Facility off of Irish Drive. We do utilize office space at Thomas Park and share equipment back and forth throughout that division, or with our division throughout that department. But we do have a full fleet of forestry equipment as well. Some things you might see out in the field, next slide, would be our forestry bucket truck. We have a 60-foot reach and a 12-inch chipper unit that attaches on the back of that. Mayor Nick is rather familiar with that unit, as some of you also may be. Another piece of equipment we have is the self-propelled stump grinding unit. This is something that fits small spaces as well as large. It's 4-wheel drive, gets you to and from where you need to go with stumps, whether they're in the right of way or out in natural areas and park spaces as well. So it can be operated by 1 staff. Some of the priority topics I want to discuss tonight are the stump removal contract, the woodland salvage harvest contract, both ongoing, reforestation efforts within our community canopy, the tree ordinance amendment that you'll be most likely hearing about and seeing coming up soon, as well as the urban forest utility funds something existing, but some changes that you'll be seeing in future agendas. As far as the rural right-of-way stump removal contract, we started this last year on July 1st or so, late spring, early summer. We had over 1,060 stumps to address, and we have 340 remaining now. The current deadline is November of this year. However, we anticipate activity to complete much sooner than that. We have actually given the go-ahead to the contractor to begin work this spring, but with the 1.5 inches or so rain we had today and about every 3 days since things thawed out, it's been a pretty slow startup. So you will begin seeing activity real soon. They actually got some stumps ground on 10th Street last week. So next slide. The Folkswood salvage harvest is a majority of progress complete. That initial contract was intended to be a 2-season or a 2-year contract. It's restricted to winter timeline. And because of the timeliness of acquiring and locking a contractor in for that, we never saw any activity the first winter season from 2020 into 21. So we have one winter season under our belt, but you will actually be seeing a resolution within this current agenda to extend and amend that contract for an additional 12 months so that we can achieve that second winter working season. The majority of the remaining work to be done is less of an emphasis on salvaging and harvesting trees from the property and more so on preparation and some of the clearing and processing of the debris on the site that will remain on site so that we can facilitate the reforestation planting projects in years to come. Next slide. Urban canopy and reforestation efforts. There's some pictures up there from our kickoff project last year on 8th Avenue that we had council invited and involved with. Next slide. This is an ongoing process, something we started last year, falling out from the derecho. It's been a long-term goal for the division to increase community canopy, but we've really emphasized that in the last season's plantings and moving forward into the next 3 to 5 years. Our average annual planting for a year was 250 trees prior to the derecho storm. Last year, we planted 1,500 plus. 500 of those plantings were a smaller tree variety that is a bare root seedling that we utilize in our natural areas for more dense plantings. And the other 1,000 or so of those plantings ended up in the right of way out in city park spaces and more public spaces in a larger variety of tree, which is the 1 to 2 caliber inch. Supporting this effort, we utilize a lot of grant funding, donations, partnerships, but it's also strongly supported by the urban forest utility. Last year alone, we utilized over $18,000 of grant funding and support to plant those 1,500 trees. Next slide. Right-of-way tree ordinance amendment. This is something you will likely see more conversation on in the future. We have been partnering with community development and planning. Again, the goal long-term for forestry is always to increase community canopy, more so now than ever because of the derecho storm. But some of the things we're working on is prioritizing that green infrastructure, most specifically plantings in right-of-ways and public spaces. In order to do this, we're working to amend the current ordinance and reestablish a requirement for trees in the right-of-way with new development. There's a huge potential for planting on private property, but when we can have a requirement for trees in the right-of-way, they're under city responsibility and our care and maintenance, and we have a little more control over the quality and establishment of those trees, whereas we don't have any regulations or very limited regulations on trees and private property. Some other things that we're looking at as part of this conversation would be to identify a dedicated planting zone in the right-of-way that would be absent of underground utilities, and then potentially even a soil quality standard. One of the things we're struggling with right now the most in new development is the soil quality is very poor because there's no requirement for it there as far as amendment or topsoil, limited topsoil. So we put these trees in, we make the investment to increase this canopy, but we are not seeing the longevity or the 50 to 75-year livelihood of the trees that's typical. We're seeing 20 to 25 years and then mortality because of stress and poor growing conditions. So getting trees required in the right of way again is a huge step forward, but implementing other standards that provide a more suitable planting site for those trees to develop and thrive is going to help us grow and enhance the quality of our canopy for years to come. Next slide. The Urban Forest Utility Fund is another thing that you'll be hearing about or already have in soon to be future agendas. You're going to be proposing a change to adjust the billing of this urban forest utility from per meter to per meter rather than per dwelling. What this is going to provide is an increase to the utility fund annually and supporting the success of our divisional initiatives. It's currently $3 and the rate at this time is not proposed to increase, only the way that it is billed per unit or per dwelling. Next slide. That was all I wanted to focus on. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions, and so I'd be happy to answer anything council has. Randy?
Thanks, Mike, for your presentation. There's a couple things that I just want to address. One is I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to take a look at the updating the ordinances on those right of ways. I probably, as well as Will, talk to a lot of people that are looking at homes, and one of the number one things that they always comment is the lack of trees in the new developments. And it's just obviously a sign of our community growing into those those agriculture areas that were, once cornfields are now home developments. But, when you stop and think a little bit about there are no sounds of birds and things of that nature in the newer developments because it's not a mature, development. So there's no trees, no forestry. So I'm really excited to see some changes come about on those right of ways for adding trees. I know we can't control them on the private property, but we can sure control what the street line looks like. The second thing is just for the benefit of the public. Can you, there's a lot of trunks out there. I've taken a few phone calls where somebody has come out and recut these stumps, and they've left the additional cutback. I'm assuming that's to speed up the grinding process so they can get those cut down just a little bit. But can you just, for the benefit of the public and those that are listening, explain to them? I think I understand why they were cut, but can you just explain why these pieces of trunks were left behind while they're waiting to be ground out?
Yep, absolutely. It's a matter of efficiency, like you referenced. I think the reason it's so apparent or obvious in our community is when we had contractors in to do a majority of these tree removals that were prompted by storm response, the contractors didn't have a real specific specification or instruction on where to make these cuts. Per the FEMA regulations, they had to be within a range, but it's a fairly general range. And then we had a variety of different contractors working. So unfortunately, in tree work, efficiency wise, you want to flush cut that stump as low as possible when you're completing a removal. The contractors were not responsible for the stump removal. And so they left some of them at what is most likely a more convenient height for cutting for the operator's standpoint. And so for the efficiency of the stump removal, you don't want that extra material up above because it slows the unit down as part of the removal process. So one staff or one operator can come in and flush cut that lower and eliminate potentially 30 to 45 minutes of grinding time and make it much more efficient through that removal process. It is a kind of a first step phase as part of that overall removal process. And so the contractor is working ahead of the second phase, which is grinding and removal. And because of conditions, they're getting out, trying to get ahead and get started and work ahead. But unfortunately, we haven't seen the grinding phase coming through right behind that like we'd like to right now due to conditions.
Sure, great. Thank you. I appreciate that for the benefit of everyone listening. And then also, I just want to say too, I'm super excited about having your department as part of our city departments, as well as all the departments doing great work and couldn't be at a better time for us to get some of this canopy back in place. So thank you for all the work for you, your staff, and all the departments that are involved with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Grant and then Steve.
Yeah, Mike, first off, I'm glad you mentioned the soil quality issue. That's been a concern of mine as I've watched all of the developments go in because there's minimal good soil put back into which either to establish tree plantings or turf for that matter. Regarding trees in the right of way, is there any conflict or concern about any root development that impedes French drains systems that might be associated with the development? And maybe that's species specific, but isn't there a French drain for? And so I guess what I'm just concerned about 20 years down the road, is that going to be an impediment to the flow through a French drain system?
From my experience, it has been limited. It can be very site specific and tree species specific. With the French drain in particular, there is more of likelihood for roots to get into it because it's typically a perforated tile. And so with newer sanitary materials and plastics and connectors, we've seen a lot of decrease in tree issues in sanitary lines. But because the French drain is more open to percolation and things like that, it provides itself to still create an error. And tree systems, root systems will seek out water because that's one of the primary nutrients that they need to thrive. And so they will grow to where they can find that. It is a potential and something that we're considering. But I would say I've had limited experience with it. And it's probably a conversation we need to have with sanitary departments at some point in time and cross-reference and get a solid decision on what we want to recommend for that moving forward.
So you've got awareness of that potential conflict.
Correct.
In my way of thinking, I'd rather face a problem like that 20 years down the line and have the environmental benefit of having a tree. So it's a comparison of the benefit versus a problem. The last question I have is you mentioned that you would go to a per meter fee allocation. So if a residence has 2 meters, one for domestic use and one for exterior use, they would have that charge on both meters. Is that in essence it?
That is something I'd have to go back and check on. I'm not 100% sure on that. It should be any quantity of water that's being used. Does not apply to the fee itself. The fee is just a standard bi-monthly fee.
Right.
That I don't know 100% on. Seth, is that anything you guys?
Yeah, actually, it's going to be going to report per dwelling. So right now we charge per meter. So it's going to have a larger effect on multi-residential and essentially trailer parks. So.
But if I, as a resident, have 2 meters, one for outdoor use and one in domestic indoor.
It should be by address, by dwelling.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thanks.
Misspoke when I said that.
Okay. No problem. Just wanted to make sure my thinking was
Good clarification.
Yeah,
Thanks.
very good clarification. So I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, a couple of questions. First of all, this is the first time in a couple of years you have talked about the ash borer.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, congratulations on that, I guess. The what? Ash borer. Oh, so maybe part of that problem has obviously been resolved by the derecho. But on the right of way, one more follow-up. I see in my neighborhood, and my neighborhood is, like 30 years old. I see problems with trees in the right of way where the right of ways are narrower and the root system pops up the sidewalk and you've got problems with the root and then having problems with the sidewalk. So in narrower right of ways, are you going to have some kind of a guideline as to where you put these? Because some of these, my right of ways 8 or 10 feet wide, and some of them are only 6. And you pop a tree in a 6-foot wide right of way, those roots, many times I see when I take a long walk, having problems with the sidewalks. And then there's a problem there. So
the SUDA standard for that, I believe, is a minimum of 4 to 5 feet. I have to double check my number.
Yeah.
And that is extreme. I'd prefer not to plant in less than 8.
I would agree.
There's a lot of issues that arise with narrow right of way between maintenance, other infrastructure, specifically curb and sidewalk, weak root systems because of limited growing space. There's some other factors that impact that as well, though. Some tree species are a little more prone to surface roots. The primary factor that guides those shallow root systems is poor soil quality. If you have heavily compacted soil or clay with rock, tree systems, again, their roots will stay where they can get the nutrients and elements that they need. And primarily that's air, water, and soil. So if they can keep themselves in the soil, but they're not getting water deep down or deeper down in a compact soil, they will stay up higher where they can get those things. Primarily when we see surface roots, it is most relatable to tree species, but soil condition is a huge factor in that as well.
So another question popped in my mind. So if a tree in the right of way, which is the city's responsibility, if a root off of that tree pops up the sidewalk, who's responsible for fixing that sidewalk?
At this point in time, we've been leaning back on the homeowners.
Right.
State code, unfortunately, puts us in a very challenging situation with that concern because the tree in the right of way belongs and is responsibility to the municipality. However, the sidewalk is cost and responsibility related to the private owner. We recommend when owners replace their sidewalks that they prune those roots back and reinstall the sidewalk appropriately with subgrade compaction and the current, of acceptable specification. There is some consideration that needs to go into the impact that that will have to the tree, along with tree maturity and those types of things. I'd like to see a more detailed standard or practice as we move forward, because that is a challenge when it comes up. However, typically between myself assessing the tree and the homeowner assessing their sidewalk, we can work with building and engineering to get an extension on some of those timelines if it's been audited and called out for replacement and it's clearly due to the tree root. If it's a tree that needs care, removal, we can look at the whole picture and try to come up with a good solution that benefits the city as well as the homeowner without adding too much additional cost onto that private owner.
Yeah, one final question. So one slide indicated that the current revenue is $191,000 from the Fox Woodland salvage.
Correct.
Is that money in your department's fund balance? And how is that money being used? Is there any restrictions on that? So I haven't heard anything more about that other than we approved, the project to go ahead and do the salvage. So I have not heard about first time I've heard about the amount of money, but I'm questioning or asking, how is that money going to be used?
Yep. Original plan with the contract and the revenues developed off of those log sales was to reinvest it back into the property as part of reforestation and cleanup.
Okay.
The salvage harvest process does not necessarily leave the property in the optimum condition to replant. So there's going to be some additional work because of loss of canopy and increased exposure to sunlight. There's going to be a very extended maintenance requirement to manage invasive species so that we ensure the development of those new plantings. And so the primary plan with that revenue is to invest it back into long-term maintenance and reforestation of the property.
Okay, okay, you've answered that.
As far as location, I know it's falling under parks, but I can't speak exactly to where. I don't recall offhand.
It's going back into the urban forestry fund, and I think that's the total revenue. And so we receive 60%, 40% goes back to the contractor. That's how kind of the working deal for the contractor works.
Oh, so our split is 40%.
60-40. So.
Okay, of that number.
I believe that's the gross revenue for the city alone.
That's the gross. Never mind then.
But we have made some payments additionally that have already come from that to process some hauling and movement of materials and things like that.
All right, thanks.
So just roughly what percentage of the trees in Foxwoods were lost?
That is a hard thing to put a number on.
So it's not a rough
My
estimate.
time spent in that timber in the last few months, I would say that it is less impacted than we expected initially.
Good.
It is probably still close to that 40% range. But I would say that there's more canopy standing, but it is of lesser quality due to the storm. So I think initially we were thinking, 60-75% damage, but it's definitely, I'd say less than half. There are some pockets within the property that are nearly untouched. And there are pockets, as in reflection to that are complete clear cuts or clearings because of damage. So.
Okay, Will, and then Randy has another one.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Almost needed a special session. for
Yeah,
this.
right.
I was told 15 minutes.
I have a bunch of questions about the right of way tree ordinance, but we'll wait until we see the ordinance and I'm just see if I
Sounds
can get
good.
answered in there. Foxwoods, is that open to the public now or is it still closed?
Not officially yet. There's a couple end of work components that we're trying to input. Erosion mitigation is the primary concern there. There's the property itself provides a lot of steep slopes, and because of access and logging paths that were created during activity through the winter, there are bare dirt areas that need to be addressed as far as installing water bars, things that deflect water rather than allow it to run directly perpendicular to the slope and cause severe erosion. There's also some overseeding that needs to be done once we get into a good seeding window. Again, because of wet conditions, we've been unable to establish any of those items just because of the lack of working days or dry working days. We can't successfully accomplish those tasks with the wet conditions that we've had.
Do you foresee it opening this year or wait till after all the?
Yep,
removal is done?
absolutely. I would have told you it'd be open by now if I could have predicted weather.
Gotcha.
The intent was to have it open by, late April, May. As soon as we have a solid dry week or so of working time, we will go in and inspect, get seed down, maybe give it a couple additional weeks for germination, and then plan to hopefully open that property temporarily until the next activity begins.
Gotcha.
It would be October, late October.
So you sound like an engineer. It's weather dependent, huh?
Boom.
Last question.
It's a good thing.
Last question. I've noticed a lot of big round dirt spots where trees used to be and they never got seeded. I assume it was last year they just didn't get seeded. That there's a list they have of.
In the right of way?
Yes, yeah, the right of way. They have a list of where they need to go back to seed.
Yep.
I would assume.
There's a variety of levels of completion, and I would say none of it is full completion. We have an inventory of all those over 1,000 stumps, and we will be inspecting them with our staff for final completion or final acceptance. Some settling took place in different areas as in regards to backfilling. Some still have surface roots that need to be addressed or were just simply missed. It's a messy task, so it's really hard to be extremely thorough sometimes with those removals. And so there'll be some minor follow-up, and then because of how the season developed last winter, we were actually clean and clear of all snow and working and grinding in early December, but we were well outside of our seeding window for fall. So there's a large number of stumps that may have been removed and backfilled, but did not even see seed last year. And so that will be a huge component of completing the contract this season, completing that last 350 stumps, but also going back and addressing anything outstanding that needs touch up.
Those ones from December are probably the ones I've been seeing.
Yep, some of them, and in retrospect to that, some of them are already green. I'm amazed at how well some of the work looks, so.
That's good. All right, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you. For just two last ones from me and I'll be done, I promise. Just for clarification, there is an approved list of trees for the right of way. So not just any tree can be planted in the right of ways, but they are specific species of trees that can be planted for reasons of those roots and the size of the canopy and the height of the trunk, et cetera, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, so I know those have been addressed in the past. And then my last question is on these new developments, does SUDA or who determines the distance of the right of way when developments are actually being put in? Are we specifying that distance, or is the developer tying on and running the sidewalks at their leisure?
So all of that is covered during the subdivision review process. And so when a plat comes in, there are specified standards for the diameter of the right of way based on the classification of street. Engineering kind of dictates how wide the street will be curb to curb. Sidewalks are standard 48 inches right now. And so depending on the right of way, depending on the size of the sidewalk, or if it's a trail, kind of how it all fits in there. But yeah, so we do dictate that. From the
So do we have a minimum of 6 feet on the right of way, or a minimum of 4
Right
feet,
now,
or
it's
is it
not
just at the discretion of review?
It's not necessarily between back of curb and sidewalk. It's more about the distance, the width of the right of way. And then the sidewalk is put it's 1 foot inside the right of way, or is it 2 foot now? 2 foot inside the property line, and then the sidewalk will go there. So if you have a trail on that street that's 10 feet wide, you may have a smaller greenway on one side than the other. So.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Yep.
This has been good. Thank you. It just is another reminder that everything is so complicated, right? Everything. Who would have thought? A couple of comments and then maybe a question. I just want to make sure I understood this idea. A couple of things that were brought up was in the right of way with the tree, when we plant them, it could potentially cause challenges with what's underground, whatever the French drain system is, right? And or the sidewalk. Trees are important, and we want to make sure that we're not creating more challenges for our residents, right? So thinking that through, I think, will be really important. But I think what I heard based on your question was that there's a set variety of species that are allowed, which should mitigate those risks. Is that accurate?
That's correct. There's a lot of considerations that go into place when creating that approved species list. A lot of it has to do with above ground conflicts such as roadside and sidewalk clearance, fruiting or tree messy habit things, fruit production, for example, or growth habit. But we also do consider the root system and what goes on underground and utilities that can be in place. Before we dig, we always request locates, and there's always some fine tuning or, maybe excluding a tree planting in different projects based on what's underground as well. So.
Okay. So I understood what you were saying, which was helpful. That's good. I mean, we just don't want to create more problems, right?
No,
Because
absolutely.
then suddenly we've got.
It's not a good thing for us either. From a maintenance standpoint, the more restricted your root zone is, the shorter livelihood you're going to have with that tree simply. But there are other issues related to how that tree will fail that can be worst case scenario or more negative for both parties.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're not promoting putting trees in questionable sites either.
Great. The second one is maybe a broader question, this idea that in our new developments, the soil requirements isn't a part of maybe development, if I'm understanding this, that there's something maybe for us to be considering as we move forward to make sure that we don't have some of the things that you've shared. We built a home and we had that problem, right? We planted a tree, 11 years in, beautiful tree, and we actually had to take the tree out and start over again because of the soil situation and all of those things. So I have an experience with that. Have we ever talked about that here, or is there any sort of desire to think about that a little bit more? It seems like if we know that to be a challenge, that maybe we have an opportunity not to, fix what has already happened, but moving forward, maybe make some better decisions for our tree canopy.
I think it's certainly been considered in the past. I think the mindset that we're trying to curb or create is that we want to look at our right-of-way trees, just like we do light poles, street signs, sidewalk, and all other infrastructure. They're not necessarily an option in the community. If we want to have a thriving, vibrant, green community, it needs to be, a standard that goes in with everything else that's required there. And in order to promote the best quality of that benefit or value to the community, we need to take steps and do what we need to make sure that they develop and give us the long-term benefits we want.
Tom, do you have any insights on that?
I see him smiling, so.
it's just been, over the years, this has been a long conversation, but yeah, that's a big conversation we have. As a matter of fact, when we do commercial design, site plan review, we get all of these trees that come into odd spaces, and we remind the developers and the owners of the property that, you know, we're going to be back out in a year, and if it's not there, you're going to have to replant it. And so we do inspections on a lot of the bigger sites to ensure that the trees that are required remain there. But a lot of it has to do with, you know, they plant it on a 4-foot island and they plant a big tree and they wonder why it doesn't grow in a year. So it's.
Can you speak a little bit? I think, so my question was more about maybe not the species, but should we have something in our development requirements with the type of soil or how much topsoil or what? I don't know the soil situation, but right where there's less clay or the soil is better. I mean, should that be a part of, and is that a part of development standards in other communities? Does that make sense?
Yeah, some cities go into that depth.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on where you want to go with that. You will get pushback from the developers if I can't build a cheap home if you make me do all these standards. So it's give and take, and it's conversation, snout houses and all kinds of other things, you know, what you want to go down to.
I hear you. And at the same time, I recognize that we're in a community where we want to reach higher. And so I think having some more information on that might be helpful as we continue to, I mean, but I heard you say that today, and I think that's important just to maybe get a little bit more information for us all to consider.
If I could.
And I understand, right? Like the more expensive things are, the more requirements there are. So it's a give and take a little bit, sure.
One, if I could just add one really great document that was created out of the derecho was the relief program by the city of Cedar Rapids. And that document really highlights a lot of the details of a replanting process. And I mean, it's a pretty valuable piece, not only to them, but I think we can use a lot of that information. So I'd encourage the council and department heads as well to get a copy of that and take a peek at it as we start thinking about a street tree ordinance or just tree planting in general moving forward. It was a great piece. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we good?
Thank you for your time. You know how to get a hold of me, Randy.
All right, thanks, Mike. Okay. The update on the sanitary sewer special work session.
Yes, Your Honor. Last Wednesday, April 27th, City Council did hold a special work session on the sanitary sewer. I'm happy to say Michael Maloney is here from DA Davidson virtually with us to continue that conversation.
Okay.
Hi, folks. I want to.
Hi.
I want to address just a summary of what we talked about briefly, and then focus on some of the requested details. As we ended last week's work session, the concept here is that the council could potentially take action on a reading of the ordinance as soon as the May 19th council meeting. I think the city's Public Services Commission has scheduled or is scheduling a meeting as well in early May to review this information, just for your context. On the next slide, just some information that's already been prepared and you've already seen, but just for some anchoring today, we noted how the current city rates stack up versus some of their peers. We discussed last week. We talked about the fact that more than a third of the city's current CIP is related to sewer projects, yet the sewer revenues are only 8% of fiscal 21 audited total city revenues. While we're looking at this from a long-term perspective, I think the goal of the rate adjustments we're discussing today for near-term action are really focused on fiscal 23. And on the next slide, you'll note some of the metrics that we targeted and discussed in detail last week. Long-term liquidity in terms of debt service coverage for existing and then future debt, as well as cash balance as a percent of operating expenditures, really a day's cash on hand, short-term liquidity metric that's out there. So with that, just a refresh on the historical projections. We've got this format in a similar way to look at fiscal 23 under a variety of scenarios as was requested. But I think the key to note is we need to make sure that we're covering our debt payments on a go-forward basis, and also maintaining a positive cash balance. So this is the 5-year historical. We're going to supplement that with the projected look for you as well. Slide 6, if you'll note it, as again, a reference to what we talked about a bit last week, increasing revenues and operating expenses over a period of time. And we know our costs will continue to increase, whether that's from an operating standpoint or from a capital standpoint as well. In terms of looking at the near term, what we need to get in place for fiscal 23, we do need to address the debt coverage as talked about. We also know that current cash reserves are buffered a bit by the Series 2020 financing, where we've got some project costs that'll be expended, reducing our liquidity in the near term. So really just trying to maintain where we're at as we take that longer term approach that we detailed last week. So from that conversation, I think it's clear that in all the projections we have for you today, all of the options produced the $7.6 million that was already articulated as projected revenues in your fiscal 23 budget that was adopted a couple months ago. Along those lines, we also have city staff continuing to work on the Cedar Rapids study with HR Green regarding that operating agreement. We know the public service facility will also have some refinement that'll go into our long-term protections. And then the larger capital improvement projects related to the trunk line work, the timing and inflationary impact will need to be accounted for over the long term. So we need to take a step for fiscal 23 first, with a second target to really address some of those long-term considerations. And I think we made clear last week, this is a focus for now, and additional rate adjustments are going to be necessary on a go-forward basis. The next slide is really a good amount of data here. So I'm going to work on the left half and go to the right half for you. The left half starts with the fiscal 21 information, simply restating the data in the 5-year historical look back of the previous slide that we reviewed as well last week. Fiscal 22 is the trending of where we're going to end up, expectations for June 30 of this year. And then fiscal 23 is incorporating all of our budget expectations on the expenditure side with no change to our projected revenues because of no change in rates. So that's really as Councilmember Jensen pointed out last week as a request, what if we do nothing scenario? That's the no change in the middle of this page. Alternatively, on the right side, we have, as I noted, 3 scenarios that produce the $7.6 million of budgeted FY23 revenues that were approved previously by council, but under 3 different compositions of the rate structure. The presentation and staff's suggestion here, recommendation would be putting all of that rate change onto the variable charge, moving that from $4.60 to $6. That results in positive debt coverage and basically a zero balance at the end of the year on ending cash based on our current projections for operating and capital. Now, there is some potential upside there, as we know, but that is operating relatively narrow. That being said, we think it meets the needs for fiscal 23 as we go into the year and some of the longer term planning, plus the 3 big moving items that we discussed last week. Splitting the difference in the middle is the combination scenario that spreads the impact of the rate increases between the monthly base charge and volumetric charges at $5 instead of $6. We end up in approximately the same place overall, though the impact to customers is different between low users and higher users in this scenario. Lower users are going to take more of the impact, but $1 per unit break versus the all variable component is a benefit to those that use more water, which is how they're billed on sewer consumption. And then on the far right is the other alternative here, which is putting all of the projected increase on the base charge. That would create more certainty in terms of where rates end up. We'd move the base charge to $12 on this component. We'd leave the volumetric charge at the $4.60. Again, we end up in approximately the same position on projected revenues, Probably a little bit less volatility there due to the fixed charges, but depends on some seasonal effects. So again, we want to make it clear that we don't think the net result is particularly different in terms of the projections between these three scenarios, but think of it as those different options that the council asked us to highlight last go round. The next slide just summarizes this data, and then I'll pause for any questions from the council before wrapping up on next steps. So what does this do on the total sewer bill? I mentioned last week, it's the $2 plus $2 on the fixed charges, and then the volumetric charges. So about $28.61 per month under the typical residential customer. And then a range from about $36 to just shy of $39, depending on the concepts, the three that we outlined on the previous page. I think it's important I isolate that impact for council to be able to see and think through this. Again, this is for fiscal 23 to start the year and addressing this. The longer term planning that we've talked about and started working through with some of those big moving pieces are going to, again, take some evaluation down the road, and we can build on this at that time. The council is going to continue to make a decision about how to implement this and any future rate adjustments. So just want to be clear on that. I think this is addressing what was asked by council last Wednesday. I'll pause here for any comments, questions, either from staff or council before maybe wrapping up on next steps to finish the slides.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Steve?
I think the comment I would have is you look at the three options on the right, they all have a similar impact to a residential account, assuming 4,000 gallons. So the percentage increase is pretty similar across. I think the biggest aspect to consider is when you go all variable, that puts a higher percentage burden on the commercial accounts than the other two will. So you got, if it's all variable in the middle with the $6, then a commercial account's going to go from 128 to 166. And, the more fixed, obviously, then they're going to have a lower bill. So I think to me, that's the biggest line item to consider. The overall impact on the residential, all three is pretty similar. But the three variables, I think it's great to have the three options, by the way. Great job in presenting that. So I think to me, the biggest impact I look at is how much of an impact do you want this to have on the commercial and industrial side?
I'd just echo staff. And I think their comments, both working through this and then last week, are merited here too. The types of users within the city, we don't have particularly, as we call it, wet users, right? So we don't have those particularly high usage or high strength type users that are out there. So that maybe mitigates some of that concern as it relates to your point, Councilmember Jensen, but just wanted to make sure that was out there. And if staff had anything more to add on that point in specifics, that could be useful as well.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What kind of a business do we have that is going to use 20,000 gallons a month? Do we have an example?
It's minimal. We don't.
Is it minimal?
Yeah.
Okay.
One other thing I'll point out, Steve. So the other charges, we gotta be careful because the variable charge is what staff is recommending.
Right.
So if we go with a combination or let's say an all base charge, that will impact multifamily and residential. It comes down to that water meter scenario again. So if you have one water meter, it's going to lower your costs in the multifamilies across the board, while the single family home is going to be a higher charge. So if you consider the other two columns besides the all variable charge, you will see a discrepancy in residential rates.
Okay.
And Ryan, that's something I think we're maybe willing to address further down the road. I think the water department might be looking at that as well. So it's not that that's, off the table forever and ever. I think that just maybe takes some additional scrutiny. Am I hearing that maybe correctly from your standpoint, at least?
Yeah, and so the water department, they're looking at changing some of their billing scenarios.
years ago, we looked at billing that $2 service charge per dwelling, not per meter, which is a big change. I think down the road, that's something the council may want to take a look at.
Go ahead, Grant.
So I want to do a check on definitions here. Sewer service charge. How is that different than sanitary sewer charge? Is one of those the physical infrastructure to handle the sanitary sewer?
I'll answer that
output?
for you.
And then is the sanitary sewer charge derived from what we pay Cedar Rapids to process our sewage?
Leanne's going to answer that.
Yeah.
The quickest and easiest answer is for me in terms of the funding. So the sewer service charge, you can kind of think of as your operating cost charge. So that one goes into our operating fund. The sanitary sewer charge goes into the replacement fund and is used for the infrastructure and the CIP.
Okay, so it's the sewer service charge that is the fund essentially that pays for Cedar Rapids processing of our sanitary.
And our
sewer.
staff and.
Okay,
Yep.
I had them flip-flopped in my mind. So with that clarity on definition, it seems to me we have in aggregate an annual infrastructure burden that we have to support, which is separate and distinct from the processing burden that we have to support. And it seems the infrastructure charge, that's a fixed investment that all residents and commercial entities have to support somehow. But then the variable charge to each location is the processing charge. And so do these scenarios accurately reflect that differential? You see what I'm saying? I mean, we got to pay for the pipe to handle the output. Then we have to pay for the processing of the output. Those are two different endeavors. And I'm just wanting some commentary about which one addresses that distinction most appropriately, all variable combination or all base.
Again, yeah. And so, yep, you're absolutely right. So the increase in the variable charge, that's to offset the cost associated with wastewater treatment. Okay, that's what that's paying for. The capital projects that are coming up, that's what that sewer replacement fee is. That's really what that's intended. And so if the council decided to be more aggressive on supporting those initiatives, that's where that fee comes in and is the sanitary sewer replacement charge, that $2 charge right now.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
It's getting there, and I will admit I need to have sufficient soak time on this.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, but it's clear. I mean, what we're talking about now is how to get us out of the current trouble situation we're in, where we don't have the cash flow. We're not meeting the debt service coverage. So we're not in compliance with our covenants. And so what we're doing here is a 1-year fix. And that'll help us. It's a Band-Aid fix. And so what Grant's talking about is what are we going to do down the road to pay for all of the hardware that's going to be needed in that $83 million that is part of that study. So we're not talking about that piece yet. That's coming. This is just to get us in good standings with our bank, with our loan covenants, and being able to have the cash flow to anticipate this higher charge from Cedar Rapids.
That's entirely correct.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to mix the long term with the short term, but you know, I was just being Mr. Rate Geek here for a minute.
Anyone else? Okay.
just to wrap up here on the last couple slides, I think we mostly hit everything on 10 already. You think we know that those meet the target. I just want to be clear here. You know, I think you can see that the Band-Aid kind of thought process for fiscal 23 is about right. I think there's potential upside there if the Cedar Rapids operating costs are potentially reduced or mitigated in fiscal 23. But even in that scenario, the city's still going to require these revenue adjustments that are here. I think that's a question that could potentially come in your minds over the next couple of days, and I want to make sure that was clear. The last page is just a little bit of an action plan in terms of potential timeline. Review later this week, the Public Service Commission reviewing options in the first half of this month, and then potentially starting the ratings on the desired rate ordinance here at the May 19th meeting. 3 readings would put us through the June calendar for council action on that. Just wanted to kind of plot that out for everyone's purposes. I think staff's gone through this, but wanted to tie it all together here. That's it for me. I don't know if staff had any other additional input on this item yet today.
Anyone have anything to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a request. This particular slide deck, could we all receive that separately? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
All right, that brings us to the closed session.
Your Honor, I make a motion to adjourn to closed session regarding personnel matters as permitted under section 21.51I and litigation as permitted under section 21.51C of the Code of Iowa.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn to closed session regarding personnel matters and litigation as permitted under the Code of Iowa. Here we have the legal counsel's statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed sessions and find the same to be appropriate under Iowa Code Section 25.1I and 21.51C.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion before we vote? All those in favor of adjourning the closed session, please say aye.
We need a roll.
I'm sorry, we need the roll call. Go ahead.
Mr. Harbor,
Yes.
Mr. Jensen,
Yes.
Ms. Atkins.
Yes.
Mayor Abu Osley,
Yes.
Mr. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Menzer. Yes. Mr. Sternad.
Yes.
Okay, we're adjourned to closed session. Thank you for joining us.